Have you ever looked at an image and thought, damn, how does it look so good? Chances are that the secret lies in the edit and in using masks. Because Lightroom masks are the single biggest difference between making your edit look average or professional, if you use them correctly. So in this video, I'll show you how pros use Lightroom masks to control the light in their image, to guide the viewer's eye, and to make the images look polished without over editing them. And also, if I still sound a little bit sick, it's because I just recovered from the flu, so I hope it's not too annoying. I just figured if I can meet anyone today, I'd at least make a YouTube video. Okay, so I want to take this image first, simply because this is a fairly simple edit when it comes to masking, and I just want to show you the basics and then move from there to more advanced masks. So you can find the masks over here in this circle, and we are going to use the linear gradient firstly to darken the buildings on the left and the right, because I want to focus on the subject in the middle, and I'm just going to make the buildings a little darker to help the viewer focus on my subject. So I'm just going to use the gradient, and if you can see the overlay, you can just click over here on show overlay, or to show it or to hide it. And then I'm going to decrease the exposure. Okay, not too much, maybe like this. And then I'll drag it over a little more to make sure everything is affected. Now the issue is, if I drag too far, you can see that the sky suddenly becomes darker, and that's not what I want. I want to only affect the building. So in this case, I can subtract and then select sky. And then what Lightroom does, it automatically subtracts the sky from my mask. So if we show the overlay again, you can see that now only the building and this pole is affected by my effect. And this way, the mask only affects the building, which is what I want. And then I'll just do the same for the right side. And yeah, this is basically it for this one. This is just a very easy way. So let's have a look at the before. And then the after, we can see we've made some minor adjustments, but these do go a long way. Okay, next up is this image, which is more of a street shot. So what I want to do here is hide some of the distractions that we have in the shadow. So again, this is already a good photo, I think. We can just level it up a little more by using masks. And the reason I'm using masks is if I were to make the shadows darker. This is usually how you hide distractions in the shadows. If I did that, I could just drag them down like this, but the issue is that that kind of creates shadows that are a little too harsh, and they affect the overall image and every shadow in the image, which I don't want. So I'm just gonna undo this, and then I'm gonna come back to the masks, and then again I'm gonna use a linear gradient like this. And I'm gonna decrease the exposure to make the shadows darker, but you can already see that this is not going to work just like that. So I'm gonna drag it over here, and we can see this lighting over here is just way too dark, and also our subject is affected. So we are going to again subtract. So click on subtract and then select subject. In this way, our subject, oh, no subject detected. Okay, great. We do have another opportunity. So again, click on subtract and then select object. And this way you can broadly brush around your subject. In this way, Lightroom will select your subject, in this case this one, and remove it from the mask. And as you can see, now our subject is not affected by the darkening effect, but the shadows behind and in front of our subject still are. So this is already pretty good. The rest over here, we'll just use a good old brush. Again, subtract and then brush. Okay, this is already looking better. Now we just have to remove the rest from the area down here, where we also don't don't want too harsh shadows. Pro tip: if you click on one area with your brush, then hold Shift and click onto another area, Lightroom drags a straight line from the first point to the second one. This really helps you to get really straight edges, like in this case, where we only want to affect just the edges of our shadow. And from here on, we can then just brush again. Okay, so this is already looking way better. So the last thing I'm going to do here is add another gradient for the bottom. And I basically do the same. In this case, I don't have to adjust the mask. I'll just drag it down to make sure the darkness of the bottom shadow matches the one that we have up top. So somewhere like this is probably okay. And then I'll just have a look. Yeah, this is pretty good. And lastly, we can just, again, select our subject or select objects, because sometimes Lightroom doesn't really see what our subject is, especially in street photography. And from here, we can just use a brush. I have a custom brush that is subject. Okay, that just increases the brightness of your subject. And by the way, I highly recommend that you save these kinds of brushings and overall settings in editing, because this is a real time saver. And I do have my own subject brushes like this one to just enhance the subject or to darken the sky and all that stuff. And they come included in my preset pack. So if you want to check that out, I'll just leave a link in the description for you to check them out. Okay, so in this case, this is just a little increase in exposure, and what it also does is increase the texture of my subject. So in this case, this is it for my subject. I might just also decrease this a little bit. Yeah, this looks a little better. So yeah, this is it. So this is before and this is after. Again, these are minor adjustments, but they do go a long way to make your edit stand out and to make them still seem natural, because that is the point. We don't want to kind of make our images look fake or over edited. We just want to make subtle changes that enhance the viewer's experience when they look at our image. All right, so for this shot, I want to show you a couple of different ways in which you can adjust your masks to make them really, really specific to certain areas. So what I want to do in this image is, again, darkening it, but use a couple of different techniques or a different technique to make the masks more precise. So let's just get into the masking module, and we'll again use a gradient as our baseline. So in this case, I want to make the shadows darker. So I'm just going to drag it over here, darkening the shadows. But of course, we can see that this affects the entire area over here, which I don't want. So what I'm going to do is intersect this mask with a luminance range. And this basically means that, so firstly, intersecting means that your mask will only be applied at the areas where your first mask, so the gradient, and the second mask, in this case the luminance range, overlap. So the luminance range affects only areas with a certain brightness, and you can control which kind of brightness level is being affected. So if you drag the right slider, this affects the highlights, so the brighter portions. And if you drag it to the left, you can see that this effect is removed from the brightest portions first, which is really helpful because I want to make the shadows darker and not the highlights. So if we drag it, you can see that the effect is removed, but we do have some very harsh edges now that you can see, especially in this top area right here, because the effect is too harsh. So what we can do is, if I drag this bottom slider to the right a little bit, and then I leave this middle slider here, you can see that we lose the artifacts, which is good, simply because this middle slider is more of a feathering. So it gives us a little bit of a fall off between where the effect is applied and where it's not applied. So in this case, it makes it just much easier. So if I drag it in, you can see the change from affected to not affected, it's just a little smoother. So this was already looking pretty good. So yeah, if we look at the overlay, we can see that these areas right here are not as affected as before. But of course, we still have two things. Our subject still seems to be a little affected. Yep, so in this case, we can just subtract and then select objects and just broadly draw around our subject, not the bike, because the bike is in the shadow, or the tire in the back. So yeah, this is already looking better. And now I'll just see if I subtract and use a brush for this bottom area. I'm not entirely sure. Yeah, this also got affected, and I don't need this patch of light to be affected as much. Okay, this is already looking good. And this is really the power of using your mask and then intersecting it with a second mask like luminance range, because this allows you to be really precise without having your image look kind of over edited or just having an amateurish looking edit. And then we can just do the same for the left side. And then again, intersect it. And yeah, this really helps us kind of hide distractions again in the shadows, but in a way that still feels kind of natural. Okay, one last thing, just to make this complete, I'm gonna use one more gradient for the bottom. And here I'm just gonna decrease the temperature because I want this road to have a little more contrast to our subject, because this area right here is already very warm and I feel like the subject is kind of lost. So I want a little more contrast so our subject can pop a little more. Then I'm just gonna drag it up, see how it looks, and it doesn't affect my subject too much. So I'm just gonna leave it at that. Okay, and lastly, I'm just gonna select my subject. I'll see if Lightroom can find my subject. Okay, this is looking pretty good. And then again, I'm gonna come back here to just use subject up to make it, to highlight it a little bit more. Let's have a look at the before and after. This is looking pretty good. And the overall before and after also looking pretty good. And yeah, this is basically it. Again, I highly suggest that you build your own presets and your own custom brushes in the way that you like to edit. But if you would like a starting point, I do have my own presets that you can get via the link in the description. They also come with a couple of custom brushes that I use regularly in my edits. And yeah, with that being said, I hope this video helps you, and I'll see you in the next one.